Hello and welcome to our Lunch and Learn, how to nail your pitch with Mentor of the Year finalist, Leo, and his colleague, James. My name is Charlotte, Ecosystem Director here at Climate Salad. And before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners on the land of which we meet. For me, that's the Gubbi Gubbi people. And I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Now, I'm going to hand you over to the capable hands of Leo. And Stuart, I like that we have a very similar painting in the background.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Leo, and I work at More Traction. A few of you might have heard of More Traction through the work that I've been doing with the Climate Salad community. Joining me today is James from Path Venture. And what we're going to talk about today is something, probably the single biggest thing that comes up from all of the people that I've worked with and the mentees and all the different startups that I've been helping over the last year through Climate Salad is, can you have a look at my pitch deck? I'm about to send my pitch deck. Is it too long? Is it too wordy? Is it too short? Is it straight to the point? Is it good enough, big enough, right enough? And it's just, well, it'll become apparent as we walk through the slides and the content that we have to share with you today. But it is the sum of a ton of work. There is a ton of effort that goes into creating one, and you never quite know what good looks like, whether you're there. Do you have to tweak it for every single investor? Do you have to tweak it for every single time you share it? Is the one you present different than the one you do over email, etc.? So what we're going to talk about today are some things that we have learned through years of doing this. We have the benefit of looking at many pitch decks, and there are things that start to become apparent, both the good and the bad. And so hopefully by the end of today, you're going to walk away with a better understanding of what you could do to improve your pitch deck. By all means, this is not going to be a done and dusted silver bullet. After this 1 hour, all of your problems will go away, but we think it'll go a long way to helping you get better at it. All right, so I will share my screen, and by all means, please jump in the chat box with any questions. We will have some time for questions at the very end, but as we go through this, if you want to jump in with questions, we'll do our best to answer them as we go. All right, can everyone see my screen?
Yeah.
Perfect, all right. Okay, so first things first, to get my... Okay, what we're going to cover today, just a little bit of an introduction. We're going to go through, if you've ever heard of the ABCs of sales, we've slightly adjusted that to the ABCs of pitching, just a little framework for you to remember. We will head into the problem, solution, and product slide. And there's a reason in particular why we're going to focus on those three. And then we'll wrap up with some takeaways for you. I keep getting... So why do we care about this problem? Why this workshop? Why are we here today? I don't need to stress the importance of acting on climate change, but we don't have a hell of a lot of time for people to build products that nobody wants, for people to build climate techs that nobody wants. So our mission, both Path Ventures and More Traction, is to help you get there faster. We want you to succeed raising capital. We want you to succeed nailing your product. We want you to help us solve this problem. The more of you that solve this problem, the quicker, the sooner the problem will start to chip away at it. So that's the whole reason we're here, is to empower you, to help you, and help you answer all of those questions, because we know it is a freaking difficult journey. A little bit about us. So I've been asking for money for 17 years, both to corporates and startups. I've helped a ton of companies and helped them raise over 50 million bucks. And my sort of special sauce, or my area of expertise, is climate tech product and proposition development. When I say product, I mean both the software side, the physical side, product strategy, the business model. So everything that you have to think about before you can bring a product to life. And James, I'll let you do a quick intro.
Hi everybody. I'm James Snell. I founded Path Ventures. We're a design-led strategic consultancy, and we use design and the design thinking and design kind of approach to help organizations to tackle big strategic change and ideally accelerate it. So a lot of what we're about is helping you to get there faster through much clearer understanding of what the problem is you're trying to tackle, how you're going to tackle it, and quite importantly for what we're talking about today, how you communicate to other people about what it is that you're trying to achieve to bring everybody together. So I'm joined today by Clementine, who's one of the designers in our team. Clementine, are you with us?
Yes, hi, hello.
Hi.
Okay, so the objective of today is to help you craft a better problem, solution, and product slide. And we'll share why we want to focus on those 3 slides. We've only got 1 hour, so we have to be super focused. But we want to do that by helping you learn from best practice and the common mistakes that we've spotted, both from the decks that we've reviewed, and there's a ton of decks available online that we've pulled some examples out of to show you. So it'll be a little bit of practice and theory. It'll be more of a download. We only have an hour to go through this, so we're going to share as much as we can in the time that we have available. And as we said, we have some time for questions at the end. So there's 3 big problems to solve. So number 1 is that we know that the scale of investment going into solving the UN SDGs is far from what it needs to be. We know that on the founder side, far right, capital raising is a total pain in the ass, and we need to unlock that somehow, because in the middle, we've got investors that spend a ton of money, a ton of time trying to find investable ventures, and they're presented with a ton of options. And for them, it's a bit of a nightmare to just go through the sheer volume of opportunities that are presented to them. So the pitch deck has, for better or worse, has become the vehicle to connect those 3 different parts. The pitch deck is the pinnacle of a lot of work, and I can't even stress how much it's a lot of work, because the classic iceberg visualization, the pitch deck only represents, it's this shiny brochure at the very top, but underneath the surface there is a ton of work that has gone into it. And it is a summary. You shouldn't and you can't bring people on the journey through every single little thing that you've done. So you have to, it's part art, part science, but balancing how much detail you go into, how high level you go into, how much you should use stats and certain things to bring credibility. It's part art, part science. And we understand that it is a very difficult thing to get right, which is hopefully what we're going to help you answer today. So I'll talk about the ABCs of pitching. If anyone remembers, or if anyone's ever watched that movie, Glengarry Ross with Alec Baldwin, there's this very famous scene where he's punishing his sales team because he reminds them, hey, the ABCs of sales is always be closing, always be closing, always be closing. That couldn't be more old school in this day and age, because it doesn't matter how much hustle you put into selling. If you don't understand your buyer, if you can't communicate to them clearly, and if you're not just applying some of these best practices that we're going to share with you, it's going to be a huge uphill battle. A lot of people don't like the idea that they somehow work in sales. They don't see themselves as salespeople, but whether you like it or not, persuading, influencing, or pitching is a form of selling. So just get comfortable with it and start embracing some of these frameworks. They're going to help you get those messages across. So the ABCs of selling. So obviously this rolls off the tongue very easily, very easy to remember, always be closing. So there's a fellow by the name of Dan Pink. If you have a chance to read his book, it's called To Sell is Human. Very, very much recommend it. And he's reframed the ABCs of selling to these 3 pillars. So attunement, buoyancy, and clarity. I know that you probably don't use those words very often, but just in the interest of keeping them ABC, what we're going to do is unpack what each of these mean and why they're important for you when you're thinking about pitching. So attunement is all about walking in someone else's shoes. So put yourself in the shoes of your investor. Understand what your investor cares about, what their focus and their thesis of investment is. How can you see the world from their point of view? Buoyancy is all about dealing with rejection. You are going to get turned down a lot, and that's just the nature of sales. It's the nature of pitching, but it's the opportunity for you to take that on board, to incorporate that into your pitch, to understand what are the holes that people are poking in my pitch, and do I need to pivot? Do I need to incorporate that? How do I learn from the rejection that I'm getting? And then clarity. your job is to bring someone up to speed very quickly. It's to help them understand and for you to make sense out of this murky problem that they may or may not have a lot of context with. And it's for you to curate all of that information that was lying underneath the surface of the iceberg, for you to curate that and tell that in a good story in your pitch deck. So we're going to go into those three now in more detail. If anyone ever has heard of, you've probably heard of many songs from Motown. Motown was the original hits factory in the United States. So this guy had the success recipe sort of down pat. He knew that to create one huge success, you needed probably another 9 other hits to fail before that. So there are 9 songs that never made it to be a hit, but there was that one song that would compensate for all of the other losses that he had made in sort of recording and producing those albums. And that's not too dissimilar to what you get from investors. So first thing, with attunement, you need to speak the language of your investor. You really need to understand who your investor is and what makes them tick. And you need to think about what's in it for them. If you haven't heard of WIFM, it's a way for you to put yourself in the shoes of your investor. It's a way for you to think, all right, is this person values aligned? Are they financial return aligned? What are they trying to get out of it? A lot of investors, they have mortgages and they have kids and families too. And they're thinking about, a lot of them are thinking about a 10X and are thinking about an exit. So you have to be mindful of that. And if you have to position yourself in a way that's going to allow them to meet their objectives as an employee and as a person that's working. Now, why do they want 10X? Like the Motown example we just gave, their average return across their portfolio is closer to 3X. Because a lot of their investments lose money and there's a couple that make a lot of money. So they need to seek the 10X so that they can actually get that 3X return on aggregate across their portfolio. It's not that they're being greedy. It's not that they're being unreasonable, but it's the only way that model would work, which is why they need to command that from you. And on knowing your investor's focus, I've heard this from a few founders that they only want to pitch to impact and values aligned investors, or they're getting unreasonable asks from their investors. I think at the root of this problem is the fact that sometimes you don't know who you're pitching to, and sometimes because you're a little bit desperate for the cash, you're pitching to the wrong person. And I'll bring it to life a little bit more. So imagine this spectrum from philanthropy through to a conventional investor. And on the left-hand side, a philanthropist is seeking sort of social return. They don't really care about the financial return. It's money that it's like charity. So they don't really, as long as it's helping the greater good, they don't care if that is profitable or not profitable. They're definitely not expecting a return out of it. Versus on the far right-hand side, that the only thing they care about is a financial return. Somewhere in the middle, you have the impact investor and the ESG investor. Now, think about it for a second. If you are pitching impact to someone on the far right, they're going to be like, well, that's great, but that's not really what I care about. So you have to understand the thesis of the investor that you're speaking to so that you have the best chance of convincing them, persuading them, and aligning your pitch with what they're seeking. And similarly, even if you are pitching to the same impact investor, you're speaking their language. Think about it from their perspective. If they're presented with 2 opportunities, both of those opportunities promise the same impact and they promise the same climate change sort of benefit, which one would you invest in? The one that gives you a higher ROI, like a 10X ROI, or the one that gives you a 2X ROI? So even for an impact investor, they're going to consider the financial side of it as well. So you just have to be attuned to that. You have to understand their worldview so that you can position yourself accordingly. Now we move on to buoyancy. As I mentioned, there is an ocean of rejection that you're going to be getting. People will poke holes. You ask 30 different people for their opinion, you get 30 different opinions. You have to learn how to deal with that, live with it, accept it, embrace it. It's part of the process. It's far better to spend 9 months at a little bit of effort ongoing to try and raise capital, or a year even, than it is to spend 3 months full time, because then at that point you're desperate. So that just learn how to deal with the rejection, learn how to build the relationships, and incorporate that into your pitch. You're going to start hearing threads, you're going to start hearing common things that come up, and you need to take those on board, either by tweaking your approach, including that in your positioning and what you pitch, or even just considering a pivot altogether. So what about the elephant in the room? You probably know certain shortcomings or certain limitations or certain challenges that your business has. Don't shy away from them. Don't pretend they're not there. And you can actually address them face on in your pitch. So be quite upfront about it, be quite proactive about it, have a well thought through answer and a well thought through position in how you are responding to that particular challenge. You have to ask for feedback. I know you probably do this already. There's a clever way of asking for feedback, which is, imagine you've just delivered your pitch and you ask them for a bit of a scale. So on a scale of 1 to 10, how likely are you to invest, or how investable is my startup? They're going to give you an answer no matter what that is. And instead of asking them, why aren't you giving me a higher score? You can ask them, well, why wouldn't you give me a lower score? And that way you start to learn the things that actually do work about your pitch, the things that they do like. It's just one of the tips that's in that To Sell is Human book that I mentioned earlier from Dan Pink. The last point here is there's that fine line between perseverance and insanity. You're going to get a rejection. You're going to get a lot of feedback. You have a vision for your business. Sticking to that vision, staying that course is the drive and the passion that you have in that startup and in that business. But at some point, if you're getting rejection after rejection after rejection, you have to take it on board and realize, well, should I pivot? Should I stop? I'm not saying give up on your startup tomorrow, but again, you have to know how to toe that line between perseverance and insanity, and just take the feedback on board. The last point I'll make before we go into some examples around the problem, solution, and product slide is far too many decks are way too wordy, way too detailed, and you fail to convey clarity to your investors. You get them confused, they start reaching for their phones, and at that point you've lost them, and it's a bit of an uphill battle to engage them again, particularly if you're doing it over video like I'm doing this now. So don't lose them in the details, and really challenge yourself to think about the essence. So ambiguity is the enemy when you're trying to convey a message. If you lose people early, if people are scratching their heads trying to understand, then they're really going to struggle to follow the thread of what you're saying. It's this, again, it's part art, part science of you have to be high level enough to be understood in what you're trying to communicate, but specific enough to be credible. And this is the point where data might actually really help. Very often we see slides that use data very lightly, if at all. And data has to be backed up with a source. Data actually, instead of saying most people, I use percentages, and I use things that give credibility to my claims. Because if I just tell you most people feel worried about climate change, what does that even mean? It's not specific enough. And so it sort of detracts from my credibility. The other thing that we see quite often is people are using functional sort of slide titles. So I'll just say problem, and then I'll have a bunch of content in my slide. Solution, bunch of content in my slide. And instead, what we recommend is that each slide has a key message, and you don't want your investor wondering and trying to figure out that key message for themselves. Instead, you want to sort of lead with that key message. You want to perhaps incorporate that into the title of your slide, and you want to think through the story that your deck tells and just make it really, really clear what are the things that they're holding on to. I know I'm oversimplifying this, and this is a lot to take in a short amount of time, but this is the sort of overall feedback that in terms of your approach of attunement, buoyancy, and clarity, keeping those three things in mind when you're pitching are really going to help you go a long way. So the reason we're going to focus on the problem, solution, and product slides is because we see many pitch decks fail to engage investors in those first three slides. If you don't set up the problem, solution, and product slide properly, particularly the problem slide, if you don't set up the problem properly, they'll be wondering why the hell this business exists throughout the rest of your pitch. So that's the number one slide you want to get sorted and get it right. To begin with, are these first three. So now I'll pass on to James, who's going to walk us through the problem, solution, and product slides.
Thanks, Leo. And I'll just kind of flick to you to flick on the slides, if that's okay. Thanks. So yeah, I think that was a really good synopsis, Leo. And I think all the points that Leo said about the key message and how you kind of try and attune to the investor and make it specific, all apply to all of the examples we're going to go through. What I wanted to do to kind of flag with these problems is that none of these examples absolutely nail it. So the point about it being an art and a science and really kind of coming together is quite often in the moment with what that specific investor needs or is looking for at that particular time and where you are in your business. And so there's an element of all of this actually being quite fine-tuned to the situation or the moment or the opportunity that you're actually kind of facing into. I think that's why the point about a key message and layering some of these needs for in the slides so that you're kind of trying to actually maximize the messaging that you're giving. Like you're trying to hit multiple of these messages in as succinct a way as possible. So I'm going to try to give you some examples and draw out where this works, some of where this doesn't work as well, and help to kind of unpack this problem a little bit. I'm going to go through these quite rapidly because there's quite a few of them, but we thought it's better to show a few different things because each of them kind of speaks to a little bit of a different element. So the problem slide, the why, and really the kind of setup for why your business exists. So I'm going to start with a couple of examples of not necessarily a bad example, but perhaps the conventional way. So this sets up very cleanly. The problem is X in this case, emissions, electricity prices, land space. So this is very, very dry, cut and dry. That's all it is. Here's another example. In this case, what Toucan in this example is doing is effectively making the problem the whole climate problem. Okay. So this is the kind of very classic way, just state the problem. You're assuming the investor understands the problem and you're stating it very, very broadly. The problem with the slide is that you still need to go deeper. So you haven't actually done the whole job. And I dare say at the moment in the world, we don't actually need to state that climate is the problem necessarily. Like you're in the room with a person, that's almost an assumption. Can we jump to the next one? So another example of setting up the problem slide. In this example, this is a company called Sourceful. They do supply chain information. So in the first slide, they've done this over a couple of slides. It's probably better if you can condense this as much as possible and get it into a tighter arrangement. But there's a couple of nice things that they're doing, and I'm just going to kind of talk through some of those. So the first slide, they're setting up some of the framework for their problem. Just what are the mental models or thoughts or kind of concepts that relate to this problem. In the next slide with the screenshot, they're really bringing to life what the problem means for the end user. So in this case, it's sourcing through Excel. And I think it's quite nice the way they've really made this quite real by presenting what's probably one of the most painful Excel slides that people in this situation have to go through. So that the person who's got this problem is quite real. The pain feels real. We've all been in Excel. There's quite a tangible element to this problem. And then I quite like, sorry, Leo, just one more second on that slide. I quite like the way that they dealt with the broader climate problem in this case by making that part of their why now. And you might have seen why now slides as a recommendation in other examples. Why now basically says why this opportunity right now. It adds a bit of urgency to the investor. And so I think that's quite a nice way to address the climate element without necessarily making it all about a bigger problem that doesn't focus in enough on your particular business. And then my last example here in the space is a company called Juicy Models, who make plant-based meat. And this is an example of it being actually doing quite a lot of work with very little. So the text here reads, the food industry doesn't just need a bunch of new plant-based brands, it needs a new technology infrastructure. We are building it. Okay, so they've just made references to these ideas that the investor probably knows already, and landed the space that they're targeting. But the bit that I really like about this is this next line, which might be a little small. I'll read it for everybody. The last 10 years of plant-based were defined by minced meat. The next 10 years will be defined by whole cuts. Okay, so what they're doing here is they're really setting up the rest of their entire business proposition, which we'll show in further examples, but the whole cuts area is where their business model drives off, their product drives off, their market drives off. So they've really used this to set up the rest of their pack in quite a subtle way. So I think that's a really nice example of doing a lot with a little, and really shows that actually the kind of art and science of this, you can do this quite differently. There isn't actually a right way of doing this. It's what works for the opportunity that you that you have in front of you. So I mean, a couple of the things that this has done, bringing the problem out and making it really specific, not being too broad, getting quite clear about the actual problem that you're tackling. This mix of rational and emotional. There's something that draws people in and makes it quite human, appeals to the person, helps them understand that problem is real for them as well. You know, every investor sitting there will understand the pain of going through a terrible spreadsheet, but at the same time, compensating with statistics, compensating with that broader picture, that credible picture, like Leo was talking to. And actually, it's the dual kind of handling of these two things that means that people have got that emotional impact, they're drawn in, but they've also got that credibility and kind of assurance that this is a problem that does apply. There's an evidence base behind it. We wanted to call out really this thing about mixing the custom problem with the sustainability problem, just because it's something that we do see quite a lot with climate tech, clean tech type businesses. Our point of view is that actually focus in on the problem, like the broader climate problem is something that doesn't really need restating, or you can just reference it lightly in like we saw in some of the examples, but really help the investor to understand why the problem that you're looking at is the thing that you're going to solve. And then that last point, I think we've spoken about that, using data to get more credible about the problem that you're looking at.
I'll add one thing about making the problem specific is who has your problem. So yes, there's a climate problem and that's out there, but you're built a business to solve a problem for a certain type of customer. So make that very specific. Is it middle-aged women that live in a certain place? Is it people that fit a certain behavior? Make it really specific, because otherwise you're not solving all things for all people. And if it's very generic, people are might have questions already. So you want to try and be as specific as possible here. And that really ties in with that whole don't mix the problem, the customer problem, with the sustainability problem. You might have an impact on that problem for sustainability wise. That's the whole reason you're here, but you're also solving a customer problem in the process. So don't mix those two. Okay, I'll shut up. I'll let James keep going.
Okay, fantastic. I think we're going quite quickly. So if anybody does have questions along the way, I think we have time to handle them. Maybe pop them in the chat, and if someone could call out or just stop us. Okay, so if you get this problem slide right, what does it mean? It means that the person you're pitching to understands your reason for existing, understands why you care about the problem, hopefully understands some of your passion. I mean, I think you'll probably have heard multiple times that people are looking for a team. They're looking for, not necessarily just that you've got the product that solves the problem right now, but that you're somebody that's worth investing in because you can keep going and keep growing this thing. And so the mission and the passion of the founder is really, really important to communicate as well. And getting that clarity around the problem really, really helps with that. And then I think this talks again to the kind of the data side of this, but just helping the investor to understand that this is a big enough problem to actually start a business around. I mean, there's a multitude of problems that you can try and solve, even if you just sort of look around your desk, but there's not necessarily a company in each of those. So what you're trying to do is kind of like set up the groundwork for, here's a reason to pay attention to what I'm going to tell you about the solution. And everything we're saying about how these slides build on each other really references that point. You're kind of setting up the next stage. You grab interest. There's a big problem here. I care about it as a human being. I'm passionate about it myself as a founder. It's a big problem. Okay, now let's start talking about the next thing about how we're going to address it. So you're kind of setting yourself up to maintain the investor's interest into the next portion of your talk. Okay. Just a question about two different customers that are tied together.
Can I chime in and ask it? It's hard to kind of outline it in a chat. Is that okay if I ask a question here?
Yep.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I think it's easier if we do it now before, and then
beautiful.
do it as we're talking about these slides. Yeah.
I struggle with who the ultimate customer is, because we've got an end user who's like a mum and dad who we want to engage with on our platform. But the customer who's driving the revenue is the small business who's doing the advertising and all the rest of it. So I struggled to kind of conceptualize who our customer is in a nutshell. I think we've actually got two customers. So what's the answer to that scenario?
Okay, it's first of all, it's a fairly classic one, and I think that there's, if you want to dig deeper into it, there's a whole lot of literature around marketplaces or platform businesses that's probably useful for you. Cold start problem is the recent one that has been doing the rounds, addressing this. So it talks about how you build a marketplace with multiple parties. But I think in terms of just in a slide, my perspective would probably be that if you recognize that problem, you probably your audience members probably recognizing that problem as well. So actually, that's something to dig into and definitely try to solve. My sense is that that's probably something you want to boil down to some kind of simple diagram that actually explains that those two user groups exist. And I would dare say most investors would probably understand if you talked about customers and users as two different groups.
And I would add, who has the pain? Who's experiencing the pain the most? Who's dying for your thing to exist? Okay. Is it the business or is it the end user? And that's an important point with problem as well. Don't just talk about the problem, but talk about the pain that it brings for the users.
Cool. Thank you.
Also, a golden opportunity to explain how your solution addresses that difference, right? So you set it up as a problem, and now you're going to say how you're going to solve it. That all of that builds credibility in the way that you're talking about it. So the more you can describe how you understand the problem and why that means that your solution is the right solution, the stronger the kind of rhetorical build through this narrative is going to be.
Thank you.
Okay. So the solution slide. So really what you're trying to do with the solutions, there's a couple of things you're trying to do with the solution slide. You're trying to describe your unique approach to solving the problem, and the unique word is doing a lot of work here, because you're trying to help them understand what it is that you're doing, your unique approach. You're trying to help them to understand why it is unique, and therefore why you would have an advantage in the marketplace of other people tackling this problem in a different way. And then also you're trying to help them understand the breadth of your approach, because you may not have that entire solution in play on day one. So you will go on to talk about where you are and the stage of your business and why you need funding to get there. But really, this is your opportunity to capture them with a vision about what you're really aiming and really kind of setting out to achieve. So this is the bit where you kind of grab people's interest and make them feel the 10x, even if the 10x isn't happening on day one with your products as you have it in market. And the absolute classic here, which actually has quite a lot of backlash now, but it would be, you know, Uber saying we're not a cab company, we're a mobility company. So they're kind of expanding the vision. And I know there's plenty of examples where that's perhaps been taken too far. So just be a little bit kind of cautious with too grand an ambition. But I think it's a really good way to think about how do you describe your approach as contributing to a larger growing mission over time. So I'm going to start again with some examples that, again, they're not necessarily the bad things. And with all of these examples, these are examples that we've found of companies that have put their work out on the web. These are companies that got founded, right? So this isn't necessarily wrong, or but I think we can point out a little bit of ways to improve on it. So this is what I kind of think of as the stock standard solution slide. It really just kind of sets out what are the pieces of the puzzle that you're putting together. But there's not a lot of emotion in this. There's not something which really grabs a bigger vision. This is very, very close actually to a product slide, almost, where you're starting to talk about kind of features. This is another one that I think can be better. So how are we solving this problem? This is a company that makes laptops that are modular, that can get repaired. We build ecosystems, not just products. Consumers join us as happy, long-lived participants. We monetize longevity through a marketplace. This is all very, very high level. So I think our argument with these slides is that you actually want to do quite a lot of work. This is almost the center of the whole pitch in a way, because what you're trying to do is really encompass all of your ideas, the entirety of your business in one simple way. So I tend to think that you're looking for something quite diagrammatic here, something that can do a lot of work and maybe have multiple layers in a way that's not too confusing. So Leo's point about don't sweat the details is an element here, but you're really trying to help people understand here, what's the totality of the thing that you're proposing. Your product may only be a piece of this, but you're trying to help
the first piece of it,
how you fit in.
So the solution slide is an opportunity for you to talk about vision a little bit.
Yeah, and I think that's what that first one doesn't necessarily do. I like this one. Their first solution slide, they're doing this over a couple of slides, and really that's up to you, depending on how much you want to kind of take time to go through things, or you have time to go through things. I think our advice would be always to try to compress it as much as possible without losing clarity. If you can do it in one slide, it's better. If you can talk confidently to a single slide that allows you to address multiple angles and maybe have some discussion with the investor, that's all positive. But they're doing it over a couple of slides. Their first slide is pretty much that classic one that we looked at, which is, you know, what are the pieces of the puzzle? How do they fit together? But what I liked was their second series of slides. This is a supply chain company that gives almost like credit ratings around ESG. And what they're doing here is describing the rating system and describing the methodology. So what they're giving a kind of a zoom in to the core essence or unit that drives the engine that drives their unique difference. We have this, what do they call it? Moody's is a credit rating agency. Moody's for carbon credits. So the whole thing there is that they're then starting to give you a way of understanding, okay, I know this analogy, it works in this case, how does that work in this particular example? They're trying to convey quite a lot of information about how it works. This is another example. This is a company called Fly. I'm not 100% sure how you pronounce it. They're a German alternative milk company. And what they're doing on this slide is they're describing how their specific process adds flavor and unique health benefits to milk. So people will know what the product is, they understand milk, but this is helping them to understand their unique approach to this problem that gives them a competitive advantage.
And just tying it back to the problem slide, you can imagine how in the problem slide, this company would have spoken about how milk alternatives don't taste particularly well, how healthy alternatives aren't that tasty, and there might be some sort of shortcomings, and they're directly addressing that through their solution. You're always building on what you've already sort of stated.
Yeah, I think that point about keep building through the slide and almost creating a momentum that gets the investor to, I'm excited, I believe everything you've said, I have faith in you as a team. There's that building that momentum and kind of steady, getting closer and closer to great, we love it, let's go. Is really what works with the kind of pace.
It doesn't even talk about whether this is milk, cheese, yogurt, right? So they maybe leave the door open for that because their solution is relevant to all of those different things.
Yeah. So this is a slightly old example. This is Square, the payment company. If you don't know them, they make the kind of point of sale swipe card things that can happen on a mobile phone. So they've opened up a lot of points of sale, like ease of point of sale for small businesses. So the slides themselves are quite old. They raised a fair while ago, but what I like about these slides is the kind of density of information. They're answering quite a lot of questions within quite simple diagrams. So they're describing how the process works and some of the experience. So they're communicating that this is a simpler alternative to the bank. They're giving a bit of a sense of pricing. Again, there's a competitive advantage there. They're cheaper than a bank, so they were able to bring that in. Again, you're just answering a lot of questions up front that you will then not have to do in a Q&A with the investor at the end, right? So ultimately, if you've answered these questions up front, you avoid asking them later. You avoid asking too many questions later, where maybe actually you then get stuck in a very detailed technical discussion. Like almost the point of this pitch is to avoid having to get into a detailed technical discussion that can get derailed really easily, when actually what you're trying to get the person to is, I'm excited and I believe it, and I'd like to go forward. They also built in a bit of competitive understanding in that slide. So there's a kind of comparison with how you traditionally do it. But there's a couple of examples here about how you can actually start to bring all of this together really nicely. And I think where these slides work is when they tell a lot of stories in one go. So this is a company called Contract Book, and they talk about their solution across the user journey against what the competitors that it's replacing, right? So you're starting to get a sense of what the solution does in its totality. And the next example, a couple of things I really like about this one. This is a company called Infinite Fiber. I think I've got that right. I think it's a bit longer than that, but it's something like that. And they make a sustainable fiber product. So they're bringing together a lot of understanding around the ecosystem and how their product fits into the ecosystem with the slide. It's telling quite a lot of stories in a fairly succinct way. But they're also bringing in this kind of idea layer, this emotional layer around turning waste into a source of joy. That's quite nice. They're kind of bringing a mission and then telling you quite a lot of detail about it in a fairly clean way. So the solution slide, you're not talking about your product yet. You're really talking about your kind of unique approach and how that can generate kind of outsized impact. That's really what you're trying to get across here. You're capturing the interest with the size of the problem, and then really convincing that you have a unique approach. You've got a special way of dealing with this. It helps if you can build in some understanding of how these benefits are going to help you address competition. So if in your kind of diagrams or displays, you're showing how a competitor will be replaced, or you'll deal with the fact that people, you have to motivate people to actually kind of take it up. These are all questions that are barriers that you will then have to answer. If you can answer them up front with your solution slide, you've already kind of taken away a question or a worry that an investor might have. And then a little bit of a chance to explain your roadmap. And again, just to reinforce the point that these slides build on each other, if you're showing the bigger picture and you're now going into the product in terms of what you've built or what you're planning to build with this fund, you're really creating a link. We've got a big vision. Now we're going to show you what we have in place to address the market and kind of take a step on that vision. So your audience should know why you're unique, what's unique about you, what you do differently. They should have some sense of where you're going, what that bigger vision is. And they should have some sense of why your product is shaped the way it is. Like you've taken this problem, this is the bigger solution, and you've used the product to address that problem in a tactical way. So I think the point of this is that these things all build credibility. It's almost not, there's not a right way of doing this, but the fact that you know enough about your ecosystem, your product and your solution to have known which way to tackle it is driving a sense of credibility that you are the right team to be tackling this problem. Just going to do a quick check for questions in the chat.
No, we're good.
Okay. Great. Okay, so the product. So the product, for me, the product is all about bringing this all to life, making it real, making it tactical, making it now, and showing the opportunity today. So, Leo, if you jump to the next one, here's a couple of examples of the stock approach. Put some screenshots of a product on a page. The problem with this approach is that it doesn't really tell the investor very much about what your product is. It doesn't really dig under the hood and make it a real thing for them. It just tells them that you've built something. And in this case, it doesn't really tell them very much about it. So if you look at some slightly improved examples, the first one is Airbnb. There's a very old deck of Airbnbs, but it starts to unpack what the functions of the products are. You can search, you can review listings, and then you can book. Okay, great. So now I have a sense of how this solves the problem. The problem in this case was, how do I find a place to stay? In the next example, this is a company that does authentication systems for technology. They talk about, they basically pulled out two functions of their experience that help them to talk about channel. So in the first one, it's something you can plug and play, so that makes it very easy. In the second one, it's a computer interface for developers. So that means you can address kind of easy customers and more sophisticated customers. So it's doing a lot more information. It's carrying a lot more messaging about what this product is by really just selecting which features you talk about or how you talk about them. Sorry, next one, Leo. This is an example that I really like, though. So again, there's something here. They've taken a few more slides to unpack this, and it might be worth considering to do that. Compress it as much as you can, but don't overload. This is a fertility services company. They take the first page to really just talk about the features. So it's almost like an index of features. But then over the next pages, they unpack what that means a little bit. And so they do quite a good job of showing how they've got a mobile app and it's got these different things. What does that help you to do? So what does it help the user or the customer to actually accomplish in their life? In the next one, it talks a little bit about the journey or the experience that the customer goes through. And in the last one, it talks about how there's a service layer above that. So you get quite a good sense of actually what is it that this company offers in quite real, tangible terms. It's talking less about the overall thing and more about the specific ways that the customer will interact with your company. This one is Infinite. Again, this is the Infinite Fibers. This is their product. The interesting thing about this one is that it's actually almost their product PCI is actually almost quite close to the marketing or brand perspective that they will have when they actually go to market. So they're getting quite close to actually talking about the market-facing elements of their product when they get to the slide and introduce this product. And I think again, it's a really good example of the lead on to the next stages of your pitch. Sorry, Leo, last one. I said I'd talk a little bit more about the juicy marbles. I think they have the benefit that their product is quite self-contained. It's a very clear commodity product, but here they just break down what are the specific products that they offer. But the point with this example is in the next one, they talk about what that means for their marketing. So again, it's this lead on to the bigger messaging of your pitch. We have these products because of whole cuts, and whole cuts is going to allow us to address these new chains that current products don't actually allow them to do. So they're really making these slides do lots of work that then sets up the next message that they've got to give to be more powerful, to be more credible, to be easier to kind of understand. So the product pages, making it very real, tying it back to the key messages in your solution and problem slides, creating that clear link through all of the slides. Being a bit careful about rushing into features. Don't just describe the feature, try to show it or make it real, make it kind of tangible for people.
And talk about the benefits, not just the features.
That's right. That's right. And then, you know, not just being a kind of a billboard ad that just kind of tries to give a mood or a feeling. It's actually try to be quite specific, because the person is actually going to be caring about what is.
You don't want them wondering what the hell it is that your product does, right? Yeah. So they need to get a sense of that. What does it do? Who's it for? How is it part of your solution vision? How is it addressing the problem that you made very visceral and real from the outset?
So at the end of this, your audience should have a really clear idea of what you have, what you're taking to market, a sense of what it does, and like Leo was saying, the benefits. What does it actually do for the user, for the customer?
All right.
I'm going to pass back to Leo to wrap up.
I'm very conscious of how much we've been through in a short amount of time. But I will recap a little bit so that you walk away with all of this knowledge locked into your brain. So attunement, buoyancy, and clarity, the ABCs of pitching. Attunement, you definitely have to know who the hell your investor is, know your audience, speak their language, understand their thesis. Don't preach impact to someone who only cares about return. Don't preach return to someone who only cares about philanthropy. So know your audience. Buoyancy, you have to roll with the punches, you have to deal with the rejections, but don't feel beaten up and down on the ground, but try to incorporate that in your pitch deck, in anticipating the questions that they might have, or even considering some sort of pivot. They might help you spot an opportunity that you hadn't before. And then on clarity, finally, ambiguity is the enemy. You don't want to lose them. You don't want to bore them. You don't want to confuse them. You want to use stats to give you that credibility. You don't want to bury them in details, but you don't want to just keep it at these very high-level generic motherhood statements that leave them wondering, have you actually built anything? Onto the problem, solution, and product slide. We really believe that these are the three that you need to get right from the outset. You fail at these three and they will be struggling the rest of your pitch. They need to understand really, really well why you exist, how you're unique, how you are different, and what you're doing to solve that problem. Why you exist, how you're unique, and what you're doing to bring that to life. So the question for you now, based on everything that you just heard from us, I'd love you to add into the chat box. What are you going to work on? What did you take away from today that you might be able to action into your own pitch deck?
Leo, I just want to bring up too, at the Climate Tech Festival and Awards next week, we're also having pitches where you are given an opportunity to have a 30-second pitch. So can you do that ABC in that 30 seconds? I'd say so.
Right now?
I mean,
do you want me?
Do you want to do it for more traction or for, yeah, please.
Well, look, I could do it. I could do it. All right. Put me on the spot. I'll do it for the ABCs of pitching. All right. So you know how speaking to investors can be really daunting. You don't know what the hell they do. You don't know what they care about. They're all asking me for 10x and asking me to put together this crazy market that I've never really sort of thought to think about much. Well, the ABCs of pitching are a way for you to get attunement, buoyancy, and clarity, for you to walk in the shoes of your investor, to understand what's important to them, to incorporate the rejections that they might give you, and to communicate your pitch in a very clear way to give you the best chance of success and hopefully help your investors understand what your startup is all about. I don't know if that wasn't the best pitch ever, but hey, on the spot.
No, it's good to know. I mean, and when we were in the US just recently, we were told the attention spans are even shorter over there, and you need to have one-line pitches, explain succinctly what it is you do, your unique solution, and often an ask at the end. So I guess that's, incorporating those ABCs too.
Well, look, and that's a really good point. We've only scratched the surface of this massive problem. We've only spoken about 3 slides of your entire deck. There is so much more to it. We are going to run workshops like this for all the other slides of the deck. And eventually it sort of turns hopefully into a little bit of a how-to of the entire deck. But we know that people struggle with the first 3 slides. Those are usually the slides that aren't really doing them any justice. So there's almost no point worrying about the tail end if you haven't sorted the first 3. And then on top of that, the pitch deck is only, half of the equation. You have to have your elevator pitch, your 30-second pitch, your X for Y analogy, your full-blown tap dancing in front of investors pitch. So the actual delivery, your public speaking skills, how you communicate that, how you rehearse that, how you get feedback on your approach is another huge part of the equation that we're also sort of trying to bake into this whole new service. All right. So look, thank you so much for your time today. If you want to get an idea of where your pitch deck is at, you can head over to pitchmark.co, and we have a questionnaire that asks you and challenges you to think about every single part of your pitch deck. If you have any more questions, please reach out to James or I. We're sort of collaborating on this together, sort of like-mindeds have come together to sort of help the community. I've been I'm kind of starting my own startup and also a mentor in the community for the last year and a half. And one of the things that I love, I think, about working in the climate tech space is how people cooperate, and people that could potentially be competitors are actually aligned on values, aligned on vision, and are quite happy to collaborate together. And that's sort of what I've been doing with James over the last year as well. And it's been much better as a result of our work together. So if you're keen to find out more, please reach out via email. Don't be shy. We will hold you to account to every single thing that came up in the chat box. And again, you'll hear from us again for the follow-up workshops, the 2 and 3, when we go through the rest of the slides.
Thank you so much, Leo and James.
Thanks, everybody.